and welcome to today's Pick It video where I thought I would show some of the things that I have found and added to my collection over the last little while. The last time that I made one of these was actually at the beginning of March, but that one was all about kind of the things that I added to my collection while I was away for all that time. So, you know, there was just really like 10 of the most awesome things I had found and I was able to show all at once. Well, today is going to definitely be more like, you know, individual games, along with a console and some other cool little items. But if you haven't checked out that previous Pick It video, I definitely recommend checking that one out as well. Unfortunately, the Pick It video is kind of a dying breed. I remember there was a time when I was able to make one of these, like, you know, every single week, and a lot of other YouTubers were able to do that as well, but it, you know, they're definitely not as common these days with, you know, thrifting being very dead, and just, I mean, I guess not as many people really go around and collect as much anymore, which is really sad. I will always be nostalgic for those older days, and one of the things that I always did back in my old days of Pick It videos was start with NES games that I added to my collection. And again, back in the day, before I had amassed, you know, this entire massive shelf here of NES games, it was much more common for me to, you know, come home from like a thrift store with like an armful of new NES games that I didn't already own. But today, we are just down to 2 new ones that I have to show, but they are, you know, 2 quite rare and cool ones. And the first one being Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers 2. Now, of course, you know, another awesome Capcom Disney game. There were many of them on the NES, and this one has just, you know, been very hard for me to track down and get my hands on over the last little while. It hasn't actually been going up too much in price lately, but it is still one of the games that is quite up there. Not compared to the other games I am still missing for NES, though. With this, I now only have 6 more officially licensed games I need to add before my collection is complete. And let's see if I can name all those games offhand. They are Stadium Events, Flintstones Return to Dinosaur Peak, Power Blade 2, Panic Restaurant, Little Samson, and Bonk's Adventure. So those are the 6 games that I still need to complete my licensed NES set, but all of those ones are just like super high. Like, this game is a several $100 game. Meanwhile, all those games that I listed are like, you know, 500 plus, ranging into the thousands of dollars plus. So NES collecting is definitely getting a little bit out of my reach. It's not something that I definitely, you know, want to go on to the computer and just buy all of them off eBay or something like that. For me, video game collecting has always been about going out and hunting things down myself, and that's really what I have fun doing. This wall behind me is not just a wall that, you know, I clicked on eBay and collected. This is me, and I can still remember like so many of these games, like the day that I picked them up, the day that I discovered them on a shelf at a thrift store somewhere, and those are the memories that I carry with me, you know, when I look around my collection, not just that I went on eBay and bought all of these things for maximum price. So, you know, I definitely do not plan to complete my collection like that. However, I do realize the reality that if I don't do that, ever getting my hands on those games, with thrifting being as dead as it is unfortunately definitely not going to be an easy task. But you just never know what might happen someday, so I'm not ready to just go on eBay and start dumping my wallet out yet. And the last game that I have to show is not an officially licensed game, and it is actually Menace Beach. Now, this is funny for a few reasons. If you follow my good friend Teal Game Master on YouTube, you will definitely understand why it is funny that I just got my hands on this game. I have owned this game on a multi-cart called Maxi 15, which was like a collection of 15 unlicensed games created by American Video Entertainment, Color Dreams and such, all kind of stuck on one cartridge, and you could play Menace Beach on that. Menace Beach was also later released as Sunday Funday when Color Dreams became Wisdom Tree, and kind of transformed, you know, a whole bunch of games that they had already made and gave them, like, you know, Christian undertones and such, which is just absolutely nuts. But Menace Beach is actually a cool game to have because it marks me owning every single Color Games and Wisdom Tree game on the NES, not including, you know, all the ones that are stuck inside of, you know, Maxi 15. I own the individual cart for every single one of those now, so my NES unlicensed collection is actually pretty cool. And I'm not like, you know, I guess the NES purists or something you might call them, where, you know, they only go for the unlicensed carts. You can definitely see, if you look in my wall back here, you can see a lot of the baby blue carts and stuff. Maybe my, you know, my hand's kind of off screen, but they're all over the place, you know, like there, some of the black carts, so you can definitely see. I really have, over the years, enjoyed just collecting everything I possibly could get my hands on for NES, because it's definitely one of my #1 favorite consoles of all time. So again, I don't add NES games to my collection too often anymore, but definitely 2 that I am happy to be able to check off the list. But unfortunately, you will probably not see another, you know, licensed NES game in a Pick It video of mine for a very long time, unless I get very, very, very lucky somehow. But, you know, maybe now that I've mentioned it, that will actually happen. So fingers crossed. Next up, though, we are going to look at some boxed NES games. Now, again, I remember sometimes I would tell people, I'm collecting loose NES cards, and they're always like, why don't you go box? That's way better than loose. But for me, this, again, behind me, really speaks to my childhood when I grew up with the NES. My games were not all on the shelf in boxes. They were just, like this, in, sometimes in those, like, plastic containers, just kind of lined up, or on shelves in this, like, such. And I definitely do not need to feel like, if I don't own a game in its box, it's not worth owning. I definitely just like having the games to play, and again, it's kind of that experience of just finding it back in the day. I wasn't going to pass up games that I did not own just because they were not in the box, but when I have the chance to grab games in the box these days, and they're a good deal, or it's a game I really like, I definitely take the chance to do that. And the first one that we're going to look at is A Boy and His Blob. Although, if you actually read all the stuff that's going on here, it is David Crane's A Boy and His Blob, Trouble in Blobonia. Now that is just like a massive mouthful, and it's so weird that, there's all that crazy subtitling and, pre-titling and stuff when people only call it A Boy and His Blob. I wonder if David Crane is related to Frasier Crane. Knowing all the sitcoms they're bringing back these days, they're probably going to bring back Frasier at some point too, so maybe we'll find out. But it's always been a very crazy NES game, which kind of has like a cult following. I was never able to get too into it, or get too far. It's a very strange game, as anyone who's played it will know. Next game up is the Three Stooges. Again, something I've never really been into. The Three Stooges, it's funny because they like way predate, the NES. And yet they had an NES game. It's much like Star Wars, I guess. The Star Wars movies like way predated the NES, and you still get Star Wars games on like the NES, Super NES, N64. But I guess by the time the N64 came around, they started doing the new trilogy, and there was even a newer trilogy. Star Wars is a crazy thing, but this is Three Stooges, so I have no idea why I went on a Star Wars tangent. That's another game I added to my boxed NES collection. We have Tecmo Baseball. I do not have a 5-hour story to tell about Tecmo Baseball that somehow tangents into Star Wars or another classic series. We have Roger Clemens's MVP Baseball. We have Hoops, and a riveting sports game by everyone's favorite company, Jalico, and also Pinball, one of the NES black box games. And if I had to say, there was this kind of set of NES boxed games I would like to get, I would love to have a complete set of the black box NES games, which are just the ones with the really simple kind of cover art that shows what it looked like inside the game, with just otherwise it being a completely black box. Those are the original games that came out when the NES was brought to North America back in the day. So you have games like Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, Gyromite, Hogan's Alley. All those really kind of older, more basic games in much more simpler boxes like this. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of, the not-so-great sports games. So like tennis, 10-yard fight, volleyball, also kind of have simpler boxes like that. But I just think it would be so neat to have them all, in box like that. It would look very nice. So that's all the NES stuff that I picked up, even though, again, only 2 new actual cartridge games. There is always, other NES stuff around, which I still have fun picking up, but I definitely would love to get that, official licensed card collection done someday. But with every passing day, the prices seem to get higher for kind of those 6 games. Like I said, Chippendale Rescue Rangers 2 is a game that, despite the fact it's up there in price, it hasn't really raised too much lately, but it seems like every other game I'm still missing now, like Bonk, and Flintstones Return of Dinosaur Peak, Little Samson especially, stadium events, they just, they'll always be rising. I wonder if someday they'll kind of start to come back down, but I don't foresee that too much in the future. Other NES games might, but for some reason those ones just seem to be really stubborn and do not want to come back down. There are other Nintendo consoles to collect for, though. And we have a few Super Nintendo games to look at. Artie Lightfoot is actually a fairly rare and expensive Super Nintendo game, and it is weirdly... It's made by Titus, and it's actually a half-decent game, which is kind of strange. Titus, of course, is the company who made Superman 64 on the Nintendo 64, so a lot of people, when they hear the name Titus, if you knew that they made Superman 64, you would probably cringe, but this is actually a surprisingly cool game, a cool little platform I definitely recommend checking out if you ever get the chance. I also grabbed James Bond Jr. on the Super Nintendo. Now, James Bond Jr., it's apparently based on a cartoon from back in the day that I never watched, but the NES version of James Bond Jr. is actually quite a cool game. It's just a platformer, comes kind of, some maze elements to it. Not really Metroidvania, but, the levels are kind of open-ended, so you need to kind of do a number of objectives in a variety of sections of the level, but you're not kind of just guided linearly through it. You can kind of go to different places as you choose. So I thought that was really cool about that. So I was wondering, is James Bond Jr. on the Super Nintendo going to be like a 16-bit version of that? And unfortunately, it's not. This game is much more linear. It's much more like cinematic, and there's text all over the place. It's definitely a case where I felt like I was disappointed by the Super Nintendo version compared to the NES version, which is as simple, yet so much, more exciting, I feel, than the version that kind of just bogs you down with all this text and story elements. And another game I picked up for Super Nintendo is Baseball 2000. Now this is just really strange. Like, you probably wouldn't know what kind of game this is just by looking at it. You can kind of see it's, like a happy face with like a crosshairs over it. This is like some extremely happy first-person shooter where instead of going around shooting people, you're firing like, balls at these balls with happy faces, and it's just really bizarre. And I originally read about it in Nintendo Power, but when I saw it for sale, I just had to pick it up and try it for myself because that is so bizarre. I also own the version for Game Boy Original as well. It's just such a strange game, and if you ever have the chance to play it, I mean, definitely do not pass it up. Pretty bizarre indeed. Next up, moving up from Super Nintendo, we might as well talk about some 64 stuff. Again, my 64 collection is getting quite up there near completion, but then eventually I'm gonna hit the point where it's like all the super rare stuff. So we're talking like, Bomberman Second Attack, Bomberman 64 Second Attack, the Clay Fighter, Director's Cut, like all those ones that are just super high up there. But in the meantime, I did pick up some of the ones that are still not too difficult to find, including NBA in the Zone 2000, Chameleon Twist 2, San Francisco Rush 2049, and Powerpuff Girls Chemical Extraction. Now this one's funny because someone on the top added one of those stickers so you can see what the game is from the shelf. Well, of course, normal 64 games did not include that. I've never really thought to do that myself just because I line up all my games in alphabetical order, so I don't have too much trouble finding what I want, but it actually doesn't look too bad. I have to admit that I'm kind of a fan of that. But anyway, there are just 4 new 64 games that I grabbed. Let's move on to Game Boy. The one Game Boy thing I have to show you all today, it's actually quite a cool Game Boy thing. And that is the original Game & Watch Gallery complete in the box. I think it was called Game Boy Gallery in Europe. I actually have the European version also in the box, but this one is the North American version, Game & Watch Gallery. People will know that I love Game & Watches. I have played Game & Watch Gallery 2, 3, and 4 on my channel before, so I think we will probably have to give 1 a play at some point as well. I also own over half of all of the officially licensed Game & Watches ever made, so I'm just a huge fan of the Game & Watches, and that includes of the Game Boy Game & Watch games as well. They are just so much fun to kind of just sit down and play and see how they transferred, those handheld Game & Watch games into a collection that was for the Game Boy. It's kind of funny, some of the ways that they do that. Plus, you also get the modern versions of the games, which are a lot of fun to play as well, as they feature Mario and other characters from the Mario universe. Before we talk about that one, I realized there's one more thing for Nintendo 64 that I did not talk about, and that is Pokemon Snap complete in the box. I love Pokemon Snap. It's a game that I grew up with as a kid, although I never had it in the box. So I had it's kind of a funny story. I went to a swap meet, and I found the box, just the box, with the instructions and the insert, so I bought that, and then I went to another table, and I bought the game, and altogether, I paid $25 to just kind of put it all together, and I think that Pokemon Snap costs more than, $25 complete in the box. So I think I got a good deal, kind of putting that all together, but it is always kind of funny when, you can buy pieces of something, like maybe the instruction manual here, the box here, the game here, and then suddenly, bam, you have like a complete game. I think that is so cool to do things like that, and since I have always wanted Pokemon Snap complete in the box, I thought it was pretty cool to be able to do that. Let us move on to some literature, put all this gaming aside and, expand our brain with new words and crazy, no one actually reads these things for the words. Everyone just wants to look at the pictures. It's the Game Player's Encyclopedia of Sega Genesis. Now this is very reminiscent almost of the official Nintendo Player's Guide that was released way back near the beginning of the NES's life cycle that went over all of the NES games that were released at the time. This one is Volume 3, so I mean it doesn't go over every Sega Genesis game of the time, but it is just cool. You know, over 200 pages listing all of the new Genesis games at the time, giving their breakdown, you know, letting you know what they were like. So if you don't know too much about the Sega Genesis library, you could really pick this thing up and just kind of figure out, you know, what kind of different games were available, you know, what you might be interested in. And I think that is a pretty cool book to own, especially, you know, it's a lot of pages. It's not like, you know, just like 50 pages. It's a small, you know, thin thing. 200 chunky pages of not Super Nintendo, of Sega Genesis goodness. And the other book that I want to show is the Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow Official Player Strategy Guide. Now this is, you know, exactly what you would expect it to be, the very first generation of Pokemon, but it includes all of the differences for each of the games. So I mean, it will list each route, but it will list, you know, kind of the rarities for each Pokemon in that route for each version that you know, that was available, and I think that is really cool. And another thing I like about this guide is that it includes stickers. So there's a page here of stickers. And again, you know, particularly about this book itself, the stickers have not been removed. Each of these Pokemon here is just an individual square sticker, and when you catch that Pokemon, you could then go to its page in the Pokédex section and kind of place it into the square where it's kind of outlined there, and then, you know, if you caught it, you could just kind of, you know, mark them all off. So that is really neat to have the Pokemon Red, Yellow, and Blue version kind of mint like that, where it hasn't really been messed with and the stickers are all still there. This, however, is from when I was a child. I got this way back when I first got the game, and I peeled all the stickers off and placed them where the Pokemon were when I caught them. So I just had so much fun with this back in the day. And this is just the Red and Blue version. So of course the original one released before the Yellow version ever existed. One cool thing about this though is that the last time I showed some pickups, which was actually in my swap meet video I made a couple of weeks ago when I went to a swap meet after that, I kind of showed the games that I picked up at it. I mentioned that Nintendo at some point changed the size of their strategy guides, where they used to be smaller and then they got bigger, and you can kind of see as I line them up there just how, you know, this Pokemon Yellow guide proves it, how it's actually bigger than the Red and Blue exclusive guide that came before it. This one is bigger and the pages are more awesome, and it's definitely a cool book to own. I'm just so nostalgic for the original generation of Pokemon in particular. The hours and hours and hours and hours that I spent playing that with friends. My family was always big travelers, so I mean we would travel around Canada and United States in like a trailer, sometimes in hotels as well, and I'd always have my Pokemon games and link cable with me so I could trade with others, because I only ever owned Blue. And Yellow I also owned, so I never owned Red, so there were still some Pokemon that I had trouble getting, so it was always awesome to be able to trade with others in that way. I of course also never had like a way, you know, to get like anything other than my starter. So I mean I had Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard, but I had to trade with others to get like, you know, Squirtle and Blastoise, and I think a lot of that is definitely missing from Pokemon these days with, you know, how online and all that it is. It was just so cool back then to, like, you know, go on a trip like that during the summer, have that link cable with you, and just randomly find someone who was willing to trade you. Wow, good memories indeed. Next up, let us talk a little bit about the Gamecube and the Wii. Not too much to show here, but again, I'm also going for a complete Gamecube collection. You know, I'm going for a lot of complete collections, but definitely on my radar right now is, you know, NES when I can, 64 also when I can, and Gamecube when I can. So I would say, so yeah, NES, 64, and Gamecube. Not so much Super Nintendo. Super Nintendo has like 1,000 games, and when I collect for Super Nintendo, I pick up typically the ones that I like, but not so much just like every little thing. Which is kind of strange. I feel like a lot of people probably really like the Super Nintendo, so I'm really odd in that regard. But I definitely like the GameCube more. The GameCube is just such a fantastic console in my mind. And now, I own Midway Arcade Treasures 3. GameCube generation was definitely the generation of collection games. You had like the Mega Man collections, Atari collections, Namco collections, Midway collections. Everyone was just taking all of their old games from way back in the day and compiling them on disc collections. And I think that's really cool. And you still get that a little bit, like Sega still does that today, but otherwise they would rather try to, you know, scam you for like each game individually in many cases. And I hate that compared to just being able to buy one game, you get this massive collection all in one. Moving on to the Wii, we have Wii Play Motion. I loved Wii Play back in the day. I mean, it was kind of this game came in a box, came with an extra controller, and it was just these kind of strange, simple mini games that I actually had a lot of fun playing. And you try to get, gold, silver, and bronze medals in them. For a long time, I never knew that there was actually a sequel to that game called Wii Play Motion, which focuses on mini games that involve the more precise kind of controls of the Wii Motion Plus controller, or rather, if you didn't have the actual one with the stuff built in, you could of course get the adapter and just kind of stick it onto the bottom. So I have been looking for this for a little while. Again, I don't just want to go online and buy things. I like finding things out in the wild. So I finally was able to get my hands on that, which I thought was pretty cool. And also, there is GT Pro Series. This is just a still sealed Wii game complete in the box, and it actually has kind of some weight to it. It's pretty cool. It apparently includes a steering wheel for the Wii remote, and I just love, big box games, especially since this one was still sealed. I thought that it was pretty cool to pick up. Next on the list, we have Ms. Pac-Man for the Sega Dreamcast. It's not too often that I pick up Sega Dreamcast games, but I think that the Dreamcast is a super cool console, and I know that there's a lot of people out there who, go for complete Dreamcast collections, and that's a totally understandable goal in my eyes. I think it would be so awesome to own a complete Dreamcast collection, but that is just all in there, looking very nice. The reason I picked this game up in particular, though, is because Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness is actually a pretty darn cool game with some awesome music. It has surprisingly an amazing soundtrack, and if you ever have the chance to play it or even listen to the soundtrack even, I definitely recommend doing that. It was also on PlayStation and Nintendo 64, but the Nintendo 64 version lacks in quality in a few places, like the sound quality in particular. So I thought that the Dreamcast version is probably the superior version, has better graphics than the PlayStation 1, better music than the Nintendo 64. It's probably the best of all worlds in one. So I'm looking forward to trying the Dreamcast version to see just kind of how different it is compared to other things. The next thing that I have to show is actually a console. It is something I have wanted for quite some time. I'm not really doing any editing in this video. I mean, lately I've been doing a lot of editing, but this is kind of, classic pickup video where everything was just, on the fly, no script, no editing in things. Hopefully you're enjoying that. It's very retro if you've been following me for quite some time. This is a console. It's a Japanese console. It is kind of the predecessor to a console that came to North America and Europe, but it's different enough that I've always wanted to own one, and that is the Sega Mark III. Now, this went on to become the Master System. I actually have a Master System ready. I will show you in just a minute if you don't know too much about the Master System to compare just how different it is. But yeah, it went on to become the Master System in North America and Europe, but it just looks so different in Japan. The cartridges are a different size and everything. The controllers are way different. You can definitely see kind of the similarities between the Mark III controller and the Master System controller, except there's a part on the end where they can kind of stick into, much like the Famicom, which is really neat. I like that you can kind of have a place to actually store your controllers when they're not being played. Of course, unlike the Famicom though, where the controllers are, they're not built in. You can take off unscrew the Famicom, disassemble it, and unplug them from the inside. However, unlike that, you can thankfully just unplug your Mark III controllers from the front, if you wish to. Also right here, the controller slot opens up, and this is what a Mark III cartridge looks like. Almost, very Atari 2600 shaped, and it just fits in there. And there you go. So they're 8-bit games, again, just like kind of the Sega Master System. I've always thought it would be cool to own one of these though. I just think it looks so sleek and nice. Unfortunately mine does have a little bit of that kind of yellowing going on top, but strangely not the bottom. It's one of those really weird cases where half the plastic is yellowing and half of it isn't, for some really strange reason. Also, you get power and stuff on the back. You also get AV video, which is very nice. I mean, the Master System had that too, but that is still a pretty cool thing to have. And also, the other thing I wanted to show, so if I put that down, if we compare that to the Master System in North America and Europe, this is what's it was pretty much identical to the Mark III, except, kind of redesigned in a way. I feel like, definitely a lot more plain. I guess it's kind of plain in the same sense as the NES was compared to the Famicom in Japan. It's just very blocky and, has corners and stuff. And the cartridges were also very, very boring. You know, instead of having an image, it's literally just the name. And it's not even like along the top either. They couldn't even be bothered to do that, just on the front. Overall, I'm not the biggest Master System fan compared to the NES, but in the case of the Master System, and especially the Mark III, I thought it would be so neat to own one of these, and I definitely have a video planned in the future where I always thought it would be, great to own the Mark III, because it would be something I could include in that video. So now I own one. So definitely, look forward to that coming at you in the future. And the last thing that we have to show in this video is not necessarily a video game, it's something that I thought was very cool, and that is the Texas Instrument Speak and Spell. I just thought this was so cool when I saw it that I had to pick it up. Again, it's not a game, but I mean, just listen to this thing. I can just sit here all day and press different letters. And it even has like a code system where you type in random letters. And then if you press enter, it totally turns, like, it kind of basically like, you could do this on the internet these days. So, there's like ROT 13 and stuff where you enter certain letters and then you press the enter button and it kind of scrambles them up so that unless you knew the correct way to unscramble those letters, you couldn't understand the code. I just think this thing is so neat. I'm just so nostalgic for this thing. So when I saw the Texas Instrument Speak and Spell, I had to pick it up. Of course, Texas Instrument also made the Texas Instrument computer, which had games and such, which I collect for. So I thought this was definitely at home, despite not being a video game, in my collection as a welcome addition. So that's the first time I've really just kind of gone off in a long time, talking non-stop about things in front of the camera. Again, with very little editing. Even the last time I did a pickup video, way back at the beginning of March, when I came back from my kind of hiatus, and I showed a whole bunch of the top 10, best things that I found during that time. That was very kind of edited and, precisely put together, but this was very old-fashioned, and I hope that you enjoyed it, because I know that it definitely took me, like, way back to back in the day, when unfortunately pickup videos were not the rare species that they are now, so I very much, hope that you enjoyed. I don't know, again, when I'm going to accumulate pickups, because as I said, thrifting is very slow. There's definitely not many kind of, swap meets and such going on right now, so it'll probably be a little while before I make another pickup video. But despite all that, I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you will look forward to the next time when I do have enough to show for more pickups, and also whatever I make coming up. I did have, a lot more plans for this week than just Donkey Kong and this video on Friday, but hopefully, as the weeks go on, we'll be able to get, a little bit more of the, video-wise out there. But again, thank you again for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope to see you next time for something different. So thanks and see you later.